Hi, welcome to the Cinematography Salon podcast, a show about celebrating cinematography and inspiring both the current and next generation of visual artists, exploring the latest trends, techniques, technologies, and culture, and featuring exclusive interviews with some of the most talented and innovative cinematographers working today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cinematography Salon. My name is Peter Pascucci, and today is a very significant milestone. It's our 24th episode and the conclusion of our first year of the show. I wanted to extend our sincere thanks for all of your support. When we launched the show back in 2023, our goal was to have more long-form and nuanced conversations about cinematography and filmmaking. It was an attempt to cut through some of the noise and allow artists to dive deeper into their work and their philosophy and personal influences surrounding cinematography. And thanks to all of you, along with so many powerful contributions from our guests, hosts, and producers, we've been able to explore this goal and begin to uncover some of the truths of our work and the industry that we all belong to. This show at its heart is a community effort, and your engagement allows us to share these stories and insights. So today we have a very special episode which features a conversation with our current co-host Ava Benjamin Shorr, along with the founder of the Cinematography Salon and former guest David Kruta, and our esteemed former co-host and recent guest Oren Soffer. Welcome, everybody.
Hey, we're back.
Yay. All right.
Happy 2024.
Yes. So yeah, we're super hyped to kind of talk about a wide variety of topics today. And we thought it would be cool to sort of do a little bit of a recap of sorts of some of the things that stuck out in our mind from this amazing past year of conversations with some incredible people, as well as just kind of get an overview from David about what's been going on with the salon. There's been so much activity this past year. So yeah, basically, David, we're hoping that you could tell us some notable moments, everything from the ASC Lens Day to expanding events on both coasts, partnerships, RE-supported panel discussions, all sorts of incredible in-person events. Do you want to just kind of give us a little overview of what's been going on?
Yeah, of course. Great to be back on the show again. You guys have been doing an awesome job this year, and I'm just thrilled with how it's going. But I got to say, it's been a tough year for everybody. The strikes have slowed a lot of work down, but I think that just goes to show how strong the community is and how much we all are into our craft and what we do. We've been able to do a ton of meetups this year and dive a little bit more into education. I think in the past, the salon has really been a bit more about in-person holiday events. This year, we were able to partner with Able Cine and the ASC to get some of our members into the ASC Lens Day. We did a Alexa 35 workshop with Declan Quinn, ASC, also at Able Cine. That was fantastic, getting to see everybody in person and actually touching camera gear for once in a little while. Then, we expanded to the coast. So we did a party at Freestyle Rentals out in LA. We're kicking off Cinegear, and one of the cool parts was that Aperture actually launched some of their products there instead of on the trade show floor. So I think it just goes to show just how strong this community is. We partnered with our friends at Variable. They're a wonderful community led by my friend John Bragle. He was actually on the show at one point talking about a lot of mental health related things in this field. So we were able to join our communities together for a nice get together this past summer. We partnered with the Production Design Collective and did a panel at ARI talking about the ways that cinematographers, colorists, and production designers can work together better. And then we had our Halloween party in LA at SV Studios with Atlas Lens Co. That was pretty rad. They set up an old school pickup truck and had a couple actors playing out like this chainsaw massacre scene in the middle of the dance floor. And then we just had our annual holiday party, which was our biggest yet. I think it was well over 500 people attended. My DJ that did my wedding came out and DJ for us, kept the tunes spinning all night. It just seems like every year more and more people are getting involved, more and more people are coming to these events, and it just shows that there's a lot of demand and a lot of need for the community aspect that just, I guess, wasn't there before.
I'd be curious to know, where these happen. Are they in a specific city?
Most of our stuff's in New York, just because I'm based here. Expanding to LA has been great. Our demographics tend to be about 50-50 New York and LA. So now that I've got a few more people on the ground in LA, I think it's going to expand that a bit. And we're also starting to talk about doing some more next year, starting to think about maybe doing something at South by Southwest. We've been working with the Austin Cinematography Group, and they've been lovely and supportive. We're trying to get everybody included.
That's awesome.
I was curious to ask a little bit more about the panel at ARI, because I thought that was just a really interesting idea to really dive deep into a topic with production design and cinematography. And it was cool that I believe a previous guest of ours, Zen, was the moderator of that panel. You want to just tell us a little bit more about some of those kind of panel type of talks and any future plans for that type of event?
Yeah, so when I'm looking at what the salon is doing for people, I'm starting to see that it really is hitting that middle ground between the age 25 to 35-ish range, where maybe you're a few years out of film school, you've just gotten your footing in the industry, and you're now a professional. But you might not have joined the ASC yet, you might not be in the union yet, and I think that there's this huge kind of gap in education, community support in that roughly 10-year time period that as we keep doing these events, I'm seeing it become more necessary to start serving those things. You know, like the various panels. I mean, that room was filled. Unfortunately, I actually couldn't be there because I was in LA setting up the Halloween party. But everything that I heard and watching back the recording, it really shows that people are hungry for this, and people are hungry for education and for networking and becoming better at their craft. Also, with that specific topic, with it being production designers, we as DPs tend to have a very insular experience. I think especially like indies, you know, we'll come on and the production designer's already done a bunch of stuff and you can't really do a whole lot with them. So having that conversation early on, learning how to work with them and, you know, getting the colorists involved too, so you can have like a nice color workflow throughout your entire project. That kind of thing is important, and raising awareness for topics like that will allow the entire community to put pressure on, say, producers to say, all right, let's get in touch with these people early on, and it's just going to make for a better movie, a smoother experience, et cetera, et cetera. And I think going forward, the education part is really what has given me the most fulfillment. The parties are great and all, don't get me wrong, I had a total blast at those. But I think the education is really what those kind of long-term goals and expansion of this whole thing is.
Yeah, I think what's so beautiful about that is, I don't know about other departmental organizations like the Cinematography Salon that I'm sure exist. Like, absolutely certain. I mean, you know, you mentioned the Production Design Collective. I'm sure there's a Costume Design Collective. Like, I'm sure that there are within everybody else's department, like similar groups that are doing similar things to organize like communities. And I think 2024, thinking ahead and looking into the future, that kind of cross-departmental solidarity, especially in the context of, you know, what we went through this past year with the strikes, is so great and so cool. I just hope we see more of that. Like, I think it's really cool, like even just raising awareness of these other organizations and groups like within other departments to foster that communication, because it is very insular. And I think every department feels that way about itself. Like costume designers, I mean, I have a few costume designer friends and they say the same thing. It's like, yeah, all the costume designers, we all know each other, we all chat and we all commiserate. It's the same thing that DPs do. And the production designers, I'm sure, are doing that too. And I'm sure the editors are sitting somewhere in a dark room commiserating as well. And it's like, I love this idea of bringing everybody together. Like, the educational aspect of it, I think, is super crucial and really, really important and really great. And using that as a conduit for a community building aspect, I think, is like just even one level beyond, and building that kind of cross-departmental solidarity, not only in terms of labor and within the context of the industry at large, but also, yeah, like creatively. I think it'll just improve everybody's work as we all learn how to work together as departments and talk to each other. And I think even in my experience, like on films, there's a little bit of that, but there can always be more. Like, you always kind of just wish that there was a little bit more. So I think it's really cool. This is a great 2024 salon goal moving forward. So well done. I'm looking forward to more.
Absolutely.
David, one other thing on this list that I wanted to kind of hone in on was this annual holiday party that just passed, and how much of kind of an epic blowout party it was. Could you just tell us a little bit about what the party was like, and also maybe some of the partnerships that you were able to secure with brands and, yeah, anyone who was able to come into the fold and help make this thing happen?
Yeah, for sure. I think at the event itself, it was a bit of a cathartic experience. I think a lot of people have been quite frustrated with how 2023 went in terms of work, and with the struggles, you know, through the strikes. And sadly, I've heard a lot about my peers having to take other jobs and work in different industries just to make ends meet. Being able to put on an event like that where it gets all of us into one room, remembering like why we're here, what we're to build as a whole. And to your point about the sponsors and the support to make that happen, there's 1,000 people that have supported us throughout the past. I can't go through all of them here, but a few of the highlights. Sony has been around from the beginning. Paul Healy of Sony, Victor Ha of Fujifilm, Aperture, we've worked with a few of their different people, and these are people that care about the community. They come in person, they get to meet people, shake hands, have a good night, have a good time, put a face in front of this corporate brand name, and really just support the community. And on top of that, we just get to party and have fun for a night at this awesome venue, just a couple neighborhoods away.
David, could you get a little bit more specific on what some of your plans for next year are for the salon?
Yeah, for sure. So the biggest thing I've been working on, and it's been quite the endeavor, is putting together all the documentation and planning for filing for nonprofit status. So that is in the works. Don't know how long it's going to take. It's actively being worked on. The team over at Able Cine has been super supportive. So again, the goal of it is to have a mission to support and uplift the cinematography community and have the ability to raise funds and get sponsorships that can support more things like panels and masterclasses and meetup events, networking, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, it's kind of replacing what apprenticeship used to do in the past and we don't really see anymore. Trying to do that on a scale that kind of benefits everybody.
Amazing. So beyond this kind of like recap of what's been going on with the salon, we were excited to take some time today to just reflect on this past season of the show and all the amazing conversations we've had. For me personally, it's been quite an awesome journey. I feel super privileged to have been able to sort of, especially season one, was really editing all the episodes and sitting with these conversations and just being able to kind of absorb all this incredible wisdom. And it's these things like roll around my head constantly, like just between jobs and just in everyday life. And so I thought it'd be fun this episode to kind of pose some of these concepts and ideas that have stuck with me and kind of just have a little bit of a conversation about some of them and see what y'all think. So the first idea that I think is a huge one that I learned a lot thinking about was the idea of just refinement and simplicity when it comes to cinematography. And I think this has come up in countless episodes, and it's honestly also just a big part, I think, of Oren's philosophy and something that I learned from getting to do a bunch of interviews with Oren was how important it can be to just strip things down to their most fundamental elements and try to make the process and the pipeline as simple as possible. And so I'd love to hear what y'all think about that as it applies to your craft and whether you think that that is sort of a valid approach to the work that we do.
Yeah, I'm super curious to hear what David and Ava think. Like, in terms of your own work, what do you think about that? Like, I don't know. I mean, I was just chatting with a DP buddy yesterday, and we were chatting about past lives and about how simple it is visually, but it's in a good way. Like, it's a very elegant film. It's very minimalistic. I think it's beautiful. Like, it's my favorite movie of last year, but it's also one of my favorite looking movies of last year. And it's shot by Shabir Kirchner, who's amazing and very kind of under the radar. Like, he's just been doing his thing for years and has been incredible. And he's a really, really great guy too. And we were sort of noting how like the film isn't getting attention for its cinematography because it's so understated. There's nothing about it that's in your face or attention seeking. But that's where the beauty of it comes from for me. And this cinematographer friend and I were talking about how he was like, yeah, it's something I've been a little self-conscious about recently prepping a project. Like, how much do I utilize cinematography as a statement in a film versus being too understated? Like, being self-conscious about, am I doing enough or am I doing too much? And I think it's interesting, especially with some of the DPs that y'all have been talking with in season 2, like Chris Blaveldt's work, I mean, in general, but especially on May, December, just as the most recent example, is also, it's like so understated to the point where I don't think you would really think about that film from a cinematography standpoint. But to me, it's like, that's all I can think about is how beautifully elegant and understated it is and minimalistic. What are your thoughts about it, like in your own work? I'm sort of curious, and your own approach.
Yeah, I feel like you're almost conflating two different ideas. There's, I think, the idea of like restraint. And then I think the original topic of simplicity is a little bit different, where I feel like restraint is almost a philosophical approach and simplicity is maybe in a more like concrete way, like, not overlighting. For some reason, for me, simplicity feels like a little bit of a trap. Like, I think that early on in my career, when I was just starting out, I really looked up to certain cinematographers like Bradford Young. And I had that anecdote, where I was like talking about lighting this scene through a window. It was like in this garage. And Bradford Young was like, he worked really simplistically. He lit through windows, and then I didn't even carry the light onto the person's face in the room with like a a wrap light. There was no representation of light on the person's face.
Right.
So I think that simplicity is a little bit of a malleable term that doesn't really have a lot of specific consequences to it. So it's a very subjective thing where I think back on, gosh, I wasn't doing enough. So perhaps it's a very individualistic response to that term, where I kind of look back and laugh at myself at some of the funny ways that I interpreted simplicity from very elegant DPs. And now, when I think about my craft, I think about how many micro decisions I'm making about certain diffusion fabrics and whether or not the light should be bounced or direct. There's so many decisions that you're making based on taste and experience. And I actually think that the way that I'm processing how to light something or how to shoot something is very complicated and factors in many good and bad experiences of how to do something, and trying to problem solve a little bit in pre-production and then on the fly about what the best decision is. So to me, I actually think that cinematography can aesthetically come off as restrained, but I actually think the way you get there can be pretty heady and complicated.
Yeah. That's a good point. It reminds me of when Rachel Morrison was doing press and interviews and stuff for Mudbound. A lot of people were describing the look of that film as oh, it looks so naturalistic and it's so simple and it's so elegant and it looks very real and it's not overly stylized and all this stuff. And then talking about how naturalistic and simple it looks. And then she would have to go in interviews no, I can't emphasize enough how complex it is to get an image to look simple and naturally lit and elegant. And I think even talking about the creator, sometimes I felt myself fall into that trap a little bit, where I've been oh yeah, it's all naturalistic. And then it's oh, but really, it took a lot of work to get that look and a lot of precision lighting. And I guess there's maybe two things to think about. There's simplicity in execution and there's simplicity in design. And I think that sometimes something can be very simple in execution, but very complex and rich in its design. Look at any wide shot in a Terrence Malick movie. It's so beautifully complex and rich and layered and everything, but sometimes it's as simple as just waiting for the right time of day and putting the camera in just the right place. But then oftentimes something like Past Lives or May December or anything else we're talking about looks simple because it's just about restraint, like you're saying, Ava, but it's actually very complex in its execution and sometimes requires a lot of planning, thought, precision, and even tools. I don't know. It's something that I've sort of been thinking about in my own work. Peter, you do this thing that I always think about, which is, and I try to do this on commercials sometimes, and sometimes I succeed and sometimes it doesn't look good, but it's doing this mixed color temperature thing where you have a warm key, for example, but then a cool ambient light. And then it ends up giving you this really nice kind of mix and this fall off, and it enriches the skin tones and stuff like that. And sometimes I see that and it looks so beautiful and it's so well executed. And then I try it and it doesn't work. It doesn't look the way that I think it does in my head. And then in those situations, I'm I should have just stuck to the tried and true single source, one color temperature. Just don't overcomplicate it. Stick to the simple. But I don't know. There's something interesting about challenging the approach in that way.
Yeah, and Ava, what you said, I think is super brilliant about how restraint can be more of a philosophical thing, whereas simplicity can be more practical. And honestly, what's interesting about the reason why this thought popped up and why I kind of wanted us to chat about it today was because when I was thinking about it, it was very heady and it was very philosophical, because it was I had this thought, which might be really out there, but it was this idea of what is the most simple thing as cinematographers that we can do if you really strip it all the way down. The most simple thing that we can do is turn on the camera and hit the record button. And so it's got me thinking in a lot of ways, and what I've learned over the course of the show as it pertains to some of these DPs and directors and people that we've talked to is oftentimes it has so much more to do with what you're turning the camera on for rather than the technical of turning on the camera or of lighting or of any of those things. And I think that that line of thought applies to an example like Past Lives, where it's the story is so rich and so much of the cinematography is just informed by the story and the performances and the characters and that rich tapestry that was created by the director. And so it can go down a very sort of philosophical tangent in that sense. But yeah, I think that's something that I'm going to try to carry into this year, having learned from the show, is yeah, like you said, Ava, the terms can get conflated, but it's how restrained are we in our selection of work? How are we in our approach? And how is all of that hopefully in service of what's in front of our camera, so to speak.
It's a great New Year's resolution.
Yes, exactly.
I just wanted to say real quick, like for me, early on in my career, I remember watching a movie that was shot by Roger Deakins. I forget which one. Every movie that I was watching at this time, I was just analyzing and picking it apart to see how it was done. And I remember watching one of the movies he shot and forgetting about the technical stuff and getting sucked into the movie. And that to me is simplicity. So when I shot list with directors, whenever we have scenes they're not just sort of like filler scenes, but like the really important scenes, we put together our ideal shot list, but I always ask them to give me what is like the emotional core of this scene, so that when we do get on set and we run out of time, we can't accomplish all those shots, like which ones are going to give us that emotional core on screen. That to me is simplicity. Whereas if I love the way that you explain this, because restraint, same thing, that's more of like a philosophy of how I would create the images. A few years back, I shot this movie called The Last Thing Mary Saw, which was this religious psychological horror. And part of our restraint was not using other films as references. We only used paintings. Mm-hmm. And we tried to shoot every scene. If we could get away with it, we tried to shoot most scenes as a single lock-off shot and really focus on the blocking to carry that emotional core through. Obviously, you get your coverage here and there, but that's how we were restrained, which comes from finding that simple emotional core in the early part of the process.
Yeah, restraint is in 2024, I think.
It's so in. I was just thinking about it. Even I just saw Poor Things, and like I feel like restraint popped into my head watching Poor Things, which is like might seem totally not the case with like a Yorgos film or like with Poor Things specifically because of how like maximalist it is. But at the same time, I'm like, this man is so restrained. Like these color choices, these palette choices, like all these things are like ultimate restraint. Super beautiful.
Yeah, well, I mean, and the choices, the things that they go back to, that's a really interesting example because you're exactly right. Like that movie's about as complex, the opposite of simple, quote unquote, as you can get. It's all shot on stage. It's elaborate sets. It's VFX extensions. It's like artificial lighting throughout the entire film. There's no naturalistic lighting. It's big, complex lighting setups. It's LED walls. It's throwing everything at it. But there is, despite all of that, a restraint in the language because they go back to the same visual motifs. It's like you have your Petzval lens, you have your fisheye lens, you have your zoom, and there is a restraint there in picking like what is our language and why are we making those choices? What are those things revealing about character? What mood and atmosphere are they creating? Like why are we choosing those tools? I don't know, it's interesting.
100%.
And I like what you said, David, about the emotional core.
Yeah, I mean, not to be a contrarian, but
Be a contrarian. Yes, do it.
Please do it.
I was just, doing like a end of the year recap for myself, and a career ambition of mine this year is to use more hard light,
Yes.
Nice.
I don't know if you guys have like watched any of like Storaro's kind of like mid to late career work, but like he uses so much hard light,
Yes.
and it is just something that's kind of fallen out of favor, I feel like.
Yes.
And I think that maybe part of that is due to how a digital sensor picks up highlights, but there is something like so striking about that. And
Yeah.
I'm just like, man, I want to do more of that. Like I was shooting something recently and every light was just so diffuse and subtle and pings, on the face and stuff. And I was just like, God, what I wouldn't, I just want like a big, huge, like hard light,
So hard light is in, restraint is in.
No.
lens is in.
I'm so restrained. Internally, I could basically disappear into a little tiny box and never exist. Like that's just my like life, and that's how I approach life. Sometimes I'm just so tiny. I'm thinking like hard light. I'm thinking like 80s Scorsese, where it's like cocaine camera movement. Like The Color of Money, just like crazy, pop out like whip pans and Raging Bull fight scene stuff.
I love it.
I love it too.
I think for Ava, restraint is out. Maximalism is in.
It's fun. It's so true what you said though about how much better hard light reacts on film. Like that's something that I've realized. It's just like it's crazy how much more you can get away with like hard tungsten sources directly on talent on film. But what I feel like is so cool is that the Alexa 35 like truly is film like now. Like I mean, we talked about it with Blauvelt and stuff, but like I really do think that there's some magical stuff going on with that sensor that like the combination of 35 plus hard light or actual motion picture film plus hard light, like It's the way to go.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, I think part of it is the Ks too. I think it's resolution. That's a big part of the hard light issue that people have had recently. Oh, and I think it's funny because film is very high resolution, but in our minds and in our experience of it, like when it's projected with a projector that has a little bit of dust caked on it and the bulb's a little dim, it ends up like our memory of and our experience of watching film even now, like, you know, the New Bev or any theater that shows 35, is that it's soft. Like the image is soft and there's a bit of a glow and a fuzziness to it. But I do think, I mean, look, I'm a zealot with this stuff. Like, I think you can replicate that experience with digital. It takes work. It's not out, it doesn't look that way out of the box. But I think, yeah, Blauvelt really showcased that with May December. And I think The Holdovers did it. And there's been a few movies this year that have been like, oh, yeah, interesting. Like, you can really push what a digital negative is and like where it can go. So, yeah, I think let's all New Year's resolution to use more hard light. I think that's really, really fun ambition.
I love that.
I'm into it.
The next topic that we wanted to talk about was the price tag on a project. And it's something that I've been thinking about a lot, whether something can truly be good if it does not cost millions of dollars to produce. And basically just the simple question of, is it possible to make good art and achieve excellent cinematography without the proper resources? So yeah, I'd like to open this up to all of you and get your thoughts on price tag.
Well, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about like the economics of making a movie. I think because I more often than not find myself working on under-resourced projects, I think a little bit of money can go a really long way, especially if it's something that is well worth the price of the thing you're paying for. I think that it's good to dream and to be ambitious and to think about making things that stand out and are visually tied thematically to the thing you're doing and emotionally resonant. And I think that, you know, on small projects, say like a short film or a documentary or even like indie narrative films, like spending $10,000 or $20,000 extra on something can really make a huge difference in what you're doing. I do think that at some point, the amount of money that you're putting into something does start to drop off in terms of like how much of a difference it actually makes. And I really think like a good example of this is I saw Godzilla -1 last night, you know?
Love
and
it.
So good.
It's such a great movie. And I think that there's such a simple lesson to learn from that movie. That movie was made for like $15 million, right? Now, if there's some sort of conversion from yen going on there, maybe technically in American dollars it'd be more expensive to make.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that it would be more expensive to make in America too.
Yeah.
Like I think that the money goes a long way in a country that has different working practices and no union protections and like all these other things that productions just look differently in different places.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, but I've seen that number go around too,
Yeah.
and it's incredibly impressive. Like even if it was 30 mil, it's impressive.
Yeah.
For that kind of movie. But anyway.
Yeah, and I think really like the lesson I got from walking out of that film is that how far human emotion goes to making people want to see a movie. Like that movie is good because it is a movie that contains genuine human emotion and a good story arc, and you're invested in the characters. And it's no secret that that's lacking in a lot of big budget films. And it's like, I think this was like the most successful Japanese Godzilla film ever made, right? And or at least in America.
Yeah.
And I think just a testament to like that movie. Yeah, it has like incredible special effects, but like walking out of the movie, you know, people were talking about the characters as much they were as the effects, and Godzilla looking amazing and scary and, you know, like shocking when you first see him. Like, and I just think that like, I hope that Hollywood's reaction to Godzilla being successful isn't, okay, Godzilla's hot, let's pump out some Godzilla movies, but like, oh, this has a good story. Maybe we should like, you know, spend more time developing character arcs, or at least be a little bit more, have a little bit more discretion when it comes to like what's important, you know? And I think that like, there's just, you know, just a glut of like big budget movies that like don't make any dent on popular culture. It feels like it could literally be like fast food, and it, you know, goes right through your body super fast. There's no nutrition in it. And like culturally, it's just like lacks any nutritional value, and it just, you know, gets forgotten about. And I think that, like, I at least think that instead of like inflating projects to, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars, I don't know what value they're adding at the end of the day, and spending more time on things that actually matter. But it's hard to take lessons that are not, it's hard to make people truly deeply understand the grander meaning that comes out of successful small films like that.
Yeah, exactly. That seems to be what ends up happening every time. Like, the two most successful movies of last year were Barbie and Oppenheimer, and both were really ultimately character-driven, not spectacle-driven films. And I think most people would agree that's what drove them to success, is like audiences obviously tapped into something in those movies emotionally that brought them back. And both of those movies were made on relatively modest budgets compared to other blockbusters. And I say that, but it's also worth mentioning that we're talking about $100 million. So like both of those movies were made for $100 million. I think Barbie was 150. So that actually is more in line with like your typical blockbuster. But most blockbusters these days cost over 200. 250. That we had a few $300 million blockbusters last year. I think everybody in the industry realizes that's unsustainable and that budgets need to come down. And even in the blockbuster realm, like The Hunger Games last year was made for 100 mil. It did really well. And in terms of I don't know if any of y'all saw it, but in terms of like the visuals and the spectacle and the CG of it all, there's nothing in that movie that looks on a budget compared to something that costs 250 mil. Like, they look the same. They're just making more economic decisions. And sadly, I think people always do draw the wrong conclusions. Like, the conclusion from Barbie and Oppenheimer probably will be, A, let's adapt more children's toys and make more pink things that people can dress up as to go to the movie. And for Oppenheimer, it'll be like, let's do more historical, infamous events. I don't know, which maybe wouldn't be a bad thing. But the point is it's like you said, Ava, they always tend to like look at the superficial and not at the underlying thing, which seems obvious to anybody who thinks about it, which is that those movies did well because people responded to them emotionally and became invested in the stories and the characters. And the same thing with Godzilla Minus One, which I think really took it to the heights that it reached with very little marketing. Like, it was not marketed as a big spectacle movie. It was really a word of mouth success, which is really impressive. But my other thing about the budgets and the money is, like, I'm really torn on this issue because on the one hand, I think on the higher end, everything we're talking about right now makes total sense. Like, there's really no reason. And I think The Creator and Godzilla Minus One and some of these other films this year were really proof points of like, there's a way to do this, to do films at a scale and with spectacle that are not exuberant in terms of their budget. And there's a lot of waste in spending, and I think people acknowledge that. And a part of me wants to, like, people reach out about the FX3 and stuff like that, and a part of me really wants to be like, yeah, what's stopping you from just picking up like any old camera, GFX or an FX3 or a Blackmagic, and just going out and shooting a small film with 10 people, you know, like, could just find a really cool location and a really good script. And a part of me really wants to like encourage that and embrace that and be like, yes, that's awesome. And we should be doing that. And then another part of me is like, it's David, I know you've done films at this scale. I think Ava, you've done projects like this as well, like features or projects like in the $1 million range, 1.2, maybe just under like 800K, typical kind of indie budget. And those are hard. Those are really hard to do. And you always feel underserved and undersupported and resource starved and time starved and everything. And I look at the films that are in the indie realm this year that were successful. And I don't just mean successful financially, I mean successful as a film. Like, were really high quality and got great reviews and were really great movies. May December was made for 20 mil. American Fiction was made for 20 mil. Past Lives was made for 12, I think. And those are indie films. Like, when you hear Blauvelt or Christina or Shabir talk about those shoots, like, all of those films were made in 20-something days, which is the same as the indie schedules that we've done for a 1 mil. And they all talk about how there were restraints and there were limitations and they had to shoot all on location and there's no set builds and you run out of time and you have to pivot. Like, I just watched Christina's shot talk about American Fiction, and you're like, even on a $20 million film, you're limited to like 26 shoot days. And they had a scene that went over that was supposed to be a day scene, so they had to last minute like pivot into night. and they couldn't put condors in certain places, and they couldn't afford helium for balloons, and there were all these restrictions and restraints, and you're like, wow, even at 20 mil on an indie film, it's not enough. That's something that I don't know what the answer to that is. It's just an observation, and it's one that I don't know what to do with that thought. But it sits there as I contemplate. Films are too expensive, production is too expensive. There's a lot of waste, but there's also like things that cost money. Labor costs money. That was a big fight that we had this last year, and we're going to go into another one this year with IATSE. Like, we'll see what happens. But the point is like, I don't know. Filmmaking is expensive.
Yeah.
What we do is very specialized, and people are fighting for fair wages, and the economy of it's tricky, and I don't really know what the answer is, but it's just something I wanted to articulate, I guess.
It is interesting. Like, I have a few thoughts on it. On the one hand, what you just said about the labor strike and valuing labor, it's like, to me, it's almost as simple as just like valuing oneself. And like, I don't think it'll ever hurt if we ask for more and if we like try to increase our value as like artists and as workers. Like, I think that is super important. And on the one hand, you have glut, and like on studio movies, you have money just being sort of hemorrhaged. On the other side, you have storytellers and creatives and people sort of like racing to the bottom to make things as cheaply as they can. And I think that's probably where some of the conflict that you brought up about sort of like this FX3 thing and that kind of stuff, where it's like, are we serving ourselves by trying to do things as cheaply as possible, or is that actually long term just going to like bite us, And I think that the best like answer that I've heard to this like conflict of like, on the one hand you have like the glut, and on the other hand you have this kind of like race to the bottom, and I think that race to the bottom applies to both commercials and narrative.
Absolutely. Yeah,
I think
definitely.
that like there's kind of a trend now in a way where it's like a commercial comes up and it's like, whereas in the past you would just kind of like execute the commercial. Now there's like, oh, let's throw in like 1 million additional adornments to like satisfy some desire that isn't necessarily being requested, and stresses the budget in like a major way. And so there's definitely a whole nother conversation about this as it applies to commercial. But like, I think that the best answer I've heard to this sort of conflict, which Blauvelt talked about, but I think it's been talked about a bit on the show in the past, is just trying to make sure that whatever the project is, that the budget is aligned with the creative. That alignment is like the important thing. Because I think that like as cinematographers, we can talk about this and like share our opinions on this and stuff, but like we're not really in charge of the money or how things are allocated in many ways. And so I think from our place in this whole system, it's like keeping an eye on that alignment is like the important way to avoid, having too much glut and being a part of something like that, or things being way too like understaffed or difficult to execute.
Good. Well, all of you make great points. So to me, it's resource management. I've been on very small movies that have a director that's very prepared, a location and a script that makes sense for the budget that exists. And we can get in there, we can make something really amazing happen. And then you can go on a project that's 5 times, 10 times, 20 times bigger, and you feel like there's no money for anything because it's just all getting siphoned away on dumb resource management. I've done the $300,000 to $500,000 indies that came out amazing. And I've done the bigger ones, $5 million, where they spend $4 million on talent, and then they give you 10 days to prep. It's just poor resource management, and a lot of that comes from the top. It comes from the producer and the director and the writer, and coming up with that makes sense for the project and allocating those resources the right way.
Hi, we are excited to announce our partnership with Laowa Lenses by Venus Optics. Laowa has had a long history of providing cinematographers with unique and state-of-the-art lens options, including their recent Proteus 2x anamorphic series, which remains the most accessible T2.0 option in the market for professional production. A big thank you to SanDisk for helping support our show as well as part of their relentless reliability campaign. The Extreme Portable Solid-State Drive has become an essential on film sets and a personal favorite of mine for how durable, reliable, and fast it is. SanDisk leads in drive and memory card technology, emphasizing not just storage, but everything worth keeping. All right, so moving on to our next topic. I think this one's actually a pretty complicated one, and it's one that Ava really got me thinking about, specifically in the episode with Griffin, which was that there is this idea that the work that we do does not always need to be result-driven in a way, or at least on certain projects. And I think what Ava was referring to when we were talking about this was commercial work, that it's okay to just try to enjoy the process of what we do. And that goes for the team that we assemble, the creative spaces that we're able to inhabit and share with other people. It involves the technical side, the equipment that we get to, use. And it just goes for so many things. But yeah, I think like this idea that process can be a beautiful thing and process can be something that we celebrate is really interesting. And I think that there's countless examples in art history and artists of the past who have leaned more into process. So it's an interesting one. And I do think that in our current time could be potentially related to social media or just access in general, that oftentimes we sort of just skip right over the process part. And I think that there's a lot going on there that deserves space and attention.
Yeah, I love this. I love this topic. And I love that conversation that y'all had with Griffin, who obviously I've worked with and I've experienced the process, and always an interesting and a challenging one with Griffin. But, it's funny because actually the projects I've done with Griffin are very results oriented. Because the processes were very difficult, but I think the end result was very strong. Yeah, it's interesting. I think I take like a middle ground approach here where I think it's just not zero sum. I do think process is overlooked often, but I also don't think it's possible or realistic to take an approach and say like, well, it's only about process and it is not about results at all. And I think that ultimately there has to be some balance between the two. I think it's case by case and project by project. I mean, the one thing that I see often people get tripped up on in terms of results is, and you see this a lot on the salon, is people who end up like disappointed with some commercial. They're like, we worked so hard and we had such a great idea and we executed it, but then they messed it up in the edit, or they didn't call me for the color grade or whatever, and expressing disappointment about that. And the responses to those feelings are usually people chiming in just saying, well, that's commercials, like that's just how it goes sometimes. And so you kind of have to let go of that a little bit and not expect that every single project that you do, especially in the commercial space, is going to be a slam dunk in terms of the end result. And I think that's where people can and should, including myself, lean into process more and enjoying the process. And I do that now. Like this past year, I did a number of commercial projects, many of which will never see the light of day, as in I will never share them. Like they're probably airing on TV somewhere in Chattanooga, but I will not draw people's attention to them. And that's okay. I think that's something that is missing a little bit in the discourse, is like commercials, it's perfectly okay for that to be your day job, or industrials or documentary or whatever it is, like whatever that gig is that you're doing. It's okay that they're not all slam dunks and that they're not all the most creatively satisfying. Like we need to make money, we need to make a living, we need to pay bills. And it's cool enough that we get to be able to do that with cinematography. And even that is rare. Nobody can take that for granted, because as we mentioned, as David mentioned, like this past year, a lot of people have not been able to say that because of the work slowdown and stoppage. So like, I think that refocusing on process, especially when it comes to that side of the industry, is a really freeing, liberating kind of feeling, because it shifts the focus, or it shifts, I guess, the pressure of the project onto what am I getting out of it? If I'm not getting a cool piece that I can share on Instagram or on my website or add to my reel, by de-emphasizing result and shifting more emphasis on process, you can get a lot out of a project that is maybe not the most like end result forward or creatively satisfying. And using those opportunities to try something new, try out a new lens, try out a new lighting technique, try hard light, try mixed color temperatures, try out an FX3, try out a GFX, try out like a new camera. The stakes are low, I think, ultimately. And maybe that just is a feeling that came with time, like doing enough commercials where to the point that the stakes feel a little low. Like ultimately client and agency and all them, like they'll be happy. I know that we'll execute something that they'll like. So let's find opportunities to enjoy the process and learn something and gain something from the process. And I think that is a really powerful thing.
I gotta say, like, I think one of my biggest takeaways for 2023 was being reminded just how much I absolutely love my job and love being on set and working with people. And I don't think I've ever had the opportunity to realize just how big of a part of my career that is until the projects got taken away from you. I wasn't able to do my job as much as usual. And the few jobs that I was able to do this year, like you are, and like, I'm not going to be sharing those. Like, they're not, Instagram worthy, reel worthy, but I can remember every single one walking away at the end of the day, just feeling so fulfilled and so happy that I got to work with my friends. And yeah, client, agency, etc., all thrilled. You know, we went in, we did a good job. But just having that camaraderie and that experience on set together in person, it really drove it home to me just how much I love this.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add, because you just mentioned it, that for me, at least, what I interpret in the word process is there's the technical process and the creative process, but there's also just the process of being on set and working with people that you know, working with friends, maybe working with new people. Like, that is also a part of that process. And I think it's so important, so important to emphasize that and keep that in mind, that the experience of making a project and working on a project is really important as well. And the people that you do it with and all of that can be a really big source of positivity.
Yeah. And I think just to follow up on what you said, Oren, I was hanging out with a producer friend of mine earlier this year. She was the line producer on a movie I shot last year that was budgeted between like $2.5–3 million. We shot for like 29 days. It was a really challenging film that we did together. I look back on the process so fondly. Like, there's so many people from that film I'm still friends with and that I still keep in touch with and get lunch with, or we'll just have a Zoom call with them. And I loved everybody that I worked with on that. So something can be difficult and fun simultaneously. But, something that she said to me earlier this year is like, just become like something that's rooted in my philosophy now. I can't remember what like spurred her to say this, but she said that when you're working on a project, everything is a priority, right? Like, camera movement is a priority. The production design is a priority. Color is a priority. Like, everything in making a film is a priority. How do you like decide what is the most important thing? And I think that she was talking about how, you have to then prioritize the things that are important. What's the most important thing? If you're asking for X, is that more important than Z? And I think when it comes to process, like something that I encountered late in the year this year is like, I did 4 commercials back to back to back at the end of the year, and they were really difficult. And I think it really put these things to the test in a good and a bad way. And it made me kind of check myself a little bit, because I think on one of the shoot days, I think it got to the point where I had somehow become so invested in the idea of the process, like the enjoyment of making the film for everyone. Like, I was like thinking a lot about the crew. Are they safe? Are they happy? Are they fed? Are we not going too late? Is everyone okay? And I think that might have gotten in the way of me communicating with the director, like trying to solve a problem at hand. Like, I was so invested in the process, I wasn't thinking about the result. So I think you're totally right there, But I do think that like there is kind of the process is really important, because if you're like pushing crews to the brink of mental breakdowns, that is like just something that I don't know if I personally can like get behind that.
From a purely pragmatic standpoint, also, I think it's very clear to me, at least from past experiences and from hearing anecdotal stories from other shoots, like when you really push crew, it also ends up affecting results. And there is a line in which that's where that balance idea comes from, because if you work consistently, like super long days, and crew are tired and upset and angry and irate, you're not going to get good results. Yeah. So there always has to be a balance. But I agree with you that overemphasizing process at the expense of results can also be tricky. So yeah, somewhere in there is the balance. Like, even me, like sometimes I've found on set, I'm like, you know what? I don't really want to buddy and hang out right now, even though I'm working with friends, and I just want to focus. I will happily sacrifice that part of the process for me in order to focus on a different part of process, on the more technical side of process or the creative side of process, working with the director or whatever, at the expense of, hanging out with the ACs that I brought on that I like to hang out with. I'm like, we'll hang out offset.
I was just going to say that I have a former gaffer buddy, we're very close friends, and he's now become a full-time DP. And I kind of mentor him a little bit. And, we were talking about that exact experience where you're now no longer below the line. You're up there with the above the line people. And I know we're technically below the line, but he was saying that one of the hardest things for him was to stop hanging out with the Grip Electric team, stop hanging out with the ACs, and really focus on the collaboration with the director, the conversations with the producer to get what he needs. And that it's, it can be a little bit lonelier. And that's what he wanted. So that's what the job is.
I think 2024, the concept of the line is out.
We have to do like a rapid fire episode that's in and out in like a really sort of vapid way. That would be.
We could do a post on the Instagram or something. we can.
Stacking filters is back in.
Filters are always out for me. but I don't know. Listen, 2024, maybe we'll try new things. Maybe filters are in.
Okay, so as we wrap up, we thought it would be nice to just share some memorable moments from past interviews and pull out some highlights that kind of stayed with us. So yeah, I selected a few moments that I'd love to discuss to kick it off. And the first one is from the episode that we did with Ava as a guest, and this one was released in June. And it was a story that Ava told about walking in the woods in Oregon and how the surroundings were such that it kind of obscured her vision in a way where it almost appeared like in real life she was witnessing like digital noise or like grain or just kind of like this obscured perception of the surroundings. And I think about that a lot because I think what fascinates me so much, and something that has come up in a lot of these episodes, is just like how much perception informs our craft. And specifically for me, one thing that I'm just very passionate about is like perception of the natural world and of nature. And I do think that like everything that we do can be traced back to the way that we perceive. And like, I think you can really go to extremes with that. Like, I think even filtration in front of the lens can be compared to the way that we perceive condensation on a mirror when we're looking into it. There's just so many examples in the natural world that you can trace to cinematic techniques. And so I just thought that story was so beautiful. And what was funny about kind of like reflecting on that story now is that it came after we did the Blauvelt episode. And, Ava and Chris Blauvelt are close friends. And so it was cool to like realize that when Ava told that story, and then hearing the two of them kind of chop it up on the episode and talk about like attention to detail and attention to film grain and to how to get something filmic out of a digital sensor, it just like all kind of came full circle for me in a way in terms of just like both of their attention to detail in their work. And so I thought that was just a nice moment that I wanted to share. So the second highlight I pulled out was in David's episode. So this episode was early on in season 1. And yeah, it was David talking about the barrier to entry of what we do. And we've actually touched on this a little bit in this episode, but it's this idea that like cinematography is not necessarily an accessible art form in the same way that a painter can just set up an easel and get their paints and get their brushes and practice their craft, or even the way that a photographer has less of a barrier to entry. Like cinematography is unfortunately or fortunately like pretty complicated and requires quite a bit of resource. And I thought that comparison was really interesting. And I think about it quite a bit because I just had never thought of that element of that comparison. And, as I think about that, it does help me understand the reason why like the salon exists, and the reason why David kind of pushed for this and created this community is because like in a way, I think that the overall mission of it is to make it more accessible and is to kind of break down some of those walls. And so, yeah, I thought that little nugget from that episode was like a nice symbol of kind of the salon. And then my third memory was an episode that I actually was not a part of, which was an episode that Oren did solo with Andrew Roberts at ILM, who's a visual effects artist. And this episode was released back in September. And yeah, it was just thinking back on it now, it's just so interesting because I think when they recorded it and when I listened to it, like it's the classic thing where it's like when a project comes out versus when people are like actively working on it, it just like totally underestimated how epic their collaboration was. And seeing the creator and witnessing like sort of the collaboration between them on it totally blew my mind. And it was really cool to like think back to that conversation and be like, wow, that was when they were like, they had wrapped shooting obviously, but they were kind of like this whole incredible project that had yet to see the light of day. So I thought that was really cool. But more specifically, I think like Oren talks about quite a few different things in that episode that stuck with me. And one that's kind of an interesting one is just like Oren does have this perspective in the work that he does about self-preservation. And it can be something as fundamental as like getting enough sleep, like between shoot days, and like prioritizing like 8 hours of sleep, you know, just needing to make sure that you are like healthy and prepared and rested. And I don't think that stuff gets talked about enough with the work that we do. So yeah, those were some of my memories, and I'm looking forward to hearing what y'all were thinking of from these last 24 episodes.
Yeah, I have a couple things that have stuck with me, and I think those were all really beautiful, Peter. And I think mine are a little bit more simple and silly.
No, please. I love that.
You know, but there's two things that have really stuck with me from recording these episodes together. One of them is when we talked to Natalie Kingston, and I had asked her about if she could describe the quality of light in LA. And she said it was like iridescent, and there was a lot of like bounced light. Literally every time I look out my window or walk, I think about that. And it's just something that has just stuck with me, and I just can't help it. I look outside and I'm like, wow, look at all the bounced light. There's so many buildings here. The architecture is so beige and white, and it's so bright. You know, I've always felt like LA is so unbearably bright sometimes, you know, and I think she put words to something I felt already, which is just great. And then the other thing that has stuck with me is Griffin's obsession with the Wicked Witch of the West. I don't know why. I have thought about that so many times, like the way that he talked about her sleeves and her outfit and her silhouette. And when I saw Godzilla -1 last night, they had a trailer, you know, a re-release of The Wizard of Oz. And I was like, I should go see that because of Griffin. Yes. I was like, I should go see The Wizard of Oz. Like, that slaps, you know, The Wizard of Oz.
Also, like, when he was saying, like, it was so funny when he was saying, like, I watched that as a child, and I was like, he's like, other people think this way, like, let's go. Yeah. It was funny.
What about you, David?
I have to say, I mean, there's so many incredible moments over these last 24 episodes, and you guys have just done such an amazing job. You know, season 1 with Oren and Peter, and now season 2 with you, Ava. You're all putting in so much hard work, and you know, the topics are fantastic. You're diving in so deep with some incredible guests, and I just can't thank you guys enough for making this, you know, such a great show. And I've had a lot of people reach out to me and say how much they love it and appreciate it. So, you know, like, kudos to your hard work on that. I'd say for me, my highlight, I just keep going back to the episode with Andriy Kotlyar, the Ukrainian cinematographer, and just what it's like, you know, being a DP in the middle of an active war zone. You know, obviously that story hits close to home for me, being Czech. It puts things in perspective for me. You know, we are privileged to do what we do. We are lucky to do what we do. And for him to be doing that, you know, in the face of this violence and this horror, to still be out there telling stories, you know, making an impact, it hit, you know, it's a good thing to kind of remember going forward, you know, just how lucky we are, and how, and staying humble.
100%. And like just how powerful cinematography can be. It's like just so beautiful how resilient our craft can be.
Absolutely.
Super special episode. Alrighty, I think that's a nice note to end on. And I just think there have been so many lessons from the show and from these experiences. And I certainly do feel privileged to be part of this. And yeah, I'm just profoundly grateful to all of our listeners, to our guests, producers, the community that makes this show possible. So yeah, thank you so much, Ava, Oren, and David, for joining us today as we wrap up a year on the Cinematography Salon podcast.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you all. This was amazing. I love you all. Happy 2024. This is going to be great.
Thank you so much. Seriously. This episode of the Cinematography Salon podcast was produced by Peter Pascucci, Ava Benjamin Shorr, and David Kruta, with original music by One Wave and edited by Corey Abel. We created this episode in partnership with the Cinematography Salon, and we would like to extend a special thanks to the Salon community for supporting our efforts with this show. We'd also like to extend our gratitude to Able Cine for their continued support. If you're unfamiliar with their offerings, Able Cine provides services such as equipment rentals, sales, maintenance, training, and much more. Additionally, they host complimentary events at their various locations. For more details, please visit ablecine.com. If you enjoyed listening to the show, we encourage you to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media to stay up to date with our latest episodes and news. Thanks.